you are a venture capital investor and have been for a while. Nevertheless, so the model of venture is something that's close to my heart. But what I find sometimes lacking is the understanding from entrepreneurs that venture capital is not necessarily something for everyone. Not every entrepreneur should be raising venture capital. So can you comment on that? You touch on that a little bit in your book as well.
Yeah, I think venture capital is an incredible tool, right? Full disclosure, I'm a venture capitalist. But I think you're right. I don't think it works for every startup. And I don't think it works for every point in a startup's life cycle either. And so I think it's really important to reflect on when and why and for what we are raising that kind of capital. A quick history lesson on venture, which you will know better than I. But the venture model, I often ask my students, like, where do they think VC came from? And they'll say, well, I probably emanated from Silicon Valley. And the history is much older and from a different industry. It's the whaling industry. 70% of the whaling market in the 1800s was from one country, the United States, and 70% of that came from one town, a little town called New Bedford. And the reason one little town dominated the industry is because they'd figured out a financing mechanism that allowed investing in super high risk ventures. A lot of boats didn't come back. Some boats came back empty, and some boats paid off big, is they allowed the merchants to fund captains. So the merchants, the modern day venture capitalists, the captains, the modern day entrepreneurs, who then got a crew who were only paid based on the food that the whales that they caught. That model of aggregating different risk and getting paid off with big wins is what inspired venture capital. And part of the reason it's called carried interest, it used to be literally what you carried off the boat for the VCs.
So venture capital pretty much only, and that's why I like the analogy, really only cares about the big rewards, because that's how venture capitalists are also compensated, and they are investors. Let's just say all the institutional investors that are investing in venture capital funds are really only receiving the payoff that they're aiming for by having those companies that hit the ball out of the park.
Yeah, they're hunting whales, literally, still to this day. And I think one of the things that's exciting, but we're very early innings on this, is that we're seeing some evolution in the VC model, in the funding model for startups across a bunch of different gamuts. I think one is the types of products that are done. If venture capital is influenced by the whaling industry, another industry that funds high-risk ventures is mining, and the royalty model that they have. Well, we're seeing some people think about revenue shares as a model, or SaaS-based finance, or things like that. I think second, we're seeing some evolution around who's doing the investing. And particularly, we see that in Asia with the rise of corporates, or the rise of impact investors as well, more broadly in emerging markets, or even one day users themselves. And we had the big ICO craze, but even the broader movement of Kickstarter and things like that. I think those things are seismic shifts that we're going to see more of long term. The manifestation of which, how it works, I think we'll have to learn. And so I think the funding mechanisms will continue to evolve to suit a broader array of types of startups and a broader geographies of startups, where funding cycles are longer, where there's less VC, where you're building camels. As philosophically, we're just going to need some evolution of it. An entrepreneur I interviewed described this as the tail should not wag the dog. And I think that's a really important thing. The venture model should not dictate entrepreneurial strategy. Entrepreneurial strategy should dictate what kind of capital that person takes into their business. And therefore, VCs and entrepreneurial capital providers should actually evolve their model to have a broader array of things to suit those needs. And so I think ultimately that's what we need.